There's this philosophical movement named rationalism. I find this movement to be fascinating because I think it presents a really big problem with philosophy and my own philosophy that I have a tough time addressing, right? And that's the issue of, should you attempt to outthink your own nature, right? What do I mean by this? The idea in rationalism that you pull away all sort of like inherent biases you might have, all sort of emotion, right? A lot of society, they say, is based off like our icks, right? What we're like, oh, that's stupid, that's annoying, and it causes us to discount subjects or ideas that might, in all reality, be very, very rational, be the future, right? That's kind of the core of their thinking. It's interesting, right? And on the surface, it sounds really good. But sometimes the ideas behind this almost get a little bit too unemotional, if that makes sense. I'll go over some examples of this throughout the recording, but I think it's important to state here, one, that I'm not a rationalist. This is probably not like the perfect explanation of this philosophy, just because it's not something I abide by. So I probably would not be able to explain it as well as somebody who does abide by it, right? I think that's important to say. I also would like to just say the fact that the rationalists don't say that they want to be correct, right? The idea of this is not to be like the perfect, most correct source. It's just to pull as much bias as you can away from something and be less wrong. We all exercise a little bit of rationalism on a daily basis, right? We all at least should be trying to. When you're like, I think, let's say you are raised in a way where you're inherently like, I think this group or this person is gross or annoying. I think it's good to be like, let's pull away my biases. Is this person actually being gross or annoying, or just do I have something, a little hang up, right? I think that's great. But there's also an extent to this in which I wonder if it's a little bit almost anti-human to try to outthink our own emotions to this crazy of an extent, right? And I'm not talking about something like, oh, I want to try and remove my biases to have a more informed opinion on X subject. That's fine, right? And I think that's even important. Sometimes you'll remove your biases and come to an even uglier conclusion. I think it's important to discuss those conclusions, to think about them. However, people in the anti-rationalist movement often, or not the anti-rationalist, rather the rationalist movement, will oftentimes find themselves arguing for things that can be akin to things like eugenics, or being like, for an example, it'll be very common for somebody to be like, I have philosophically come to the conclusion that polyamory is like the right way that humans should go about their, way of doing things. And that's interesting, to say the least, right? I don't think, and this is not me dissing the poly community by any means. Shout out to you guys. I can never do what you do. But I think that's where the interesting things come in, right? It's like, it's almost like if you feel a certain way, especially something like that, right? Where you're like, I think it's philosophically sound for this to be the way that like love goes down or whatever. I think that's interesting because I think you could use the same exact argument back in the 1950s for like conversion therapy. You know what I mean? Like when it comes to an emotion like that, should really be philosophizing or should you just be feeling? And this is where I oftentimes find myself coming at odds with certain ideas, right? I think it's important to remember that as much as philosophy is a love of knowledge, a quest to find the truth, it also, we need to remember why we want to find that truth, and it's to serve ourselves, right? Not to serve ourselves in terms of we all want to be rich or whatever, to serve ourselves in terms of living a better life. That's where I think this can be bad, because I think that when we try to remove all emotion from decisions, you get just that, a decision that does not factor in how anybody feels. For an example, let's go back to this case of polyamory, right? You could factor it, you could be like, let's say there is some omnipotent like leader who is like, I am going to use these principles of rationalism to come up with great ideas and just make everybody else go along. We're all just going to do these rational ideas. They're rational, why not? And they come to the conclusion that maybe let's not go to polyamory here. There's no reason to be bringing them into the mix. Let's say they're like, being straight is the only way you can do things, or being asexual is the only way you can do things, right? you would just be living in an extremely repressive society, right? Like you would just, and that has, by the way, happened in the past under a guise of rationalism. And that's where I think there's also an interesting angle here, because trying to remove all bias is in itself a bias, right? To be like, I am going to remove all these biases from myself, one, is an imperfect idea to begin with, because you don't know what all your biases are going to be, right? That's why they're your biases. I will be self-critical all the time on this series. You guys have seen me do it, right? I will never actually be perfectly self-critical, because 100% self-awareness is impossible. Like, I will still be subject to where I was raised. I'll still be subject to the ideas I've been exposed to, when I was exposed to them, all these things, right? And I think that for that reason, trying to remove all my biases, I think is almost less honest than just coming out about the biases I know and letting people interact with ideas based upon that, right? I think that's a much more I also think this is the future, by the way. This is my hot take. A lot of people are like, we need more objective news or whatever, like information, how it transfers. Like you'll see like Ground News, Straight Arrow News are like these new platforms where it's like, oh, we're gonna give you the over-under of the objective news. Would love a sponsorship from either of you guys, by the way. I'll sell out in a second, don't worry. No, but I think that this is actually not the way things are gonna go. I think people just want to know who's actually speaking to them. I think people need to stop pretending they're objective, be like, this is just how I feel, this is what I think. I'm aware I might come with this angle of, I feel this way because of X, or I feel this way because of Y. You should all be aware of that, but these are still my thoughts and emotions, right? I think that's a much more honest way of doing things, because I think if I were to sit here, let's say I'm talking 2 days ago, I was talking about quantity versus quality, right? And I said at the end of that video, I wrapped it up by being like, by the way, could totally have this a take because I'm much better at the quality or the quantity side of things than the quality one. That could be why I'm presenting these thoughts that I'm presenting here, right? There's another huge reality in which I try to pull away my own emotions from the subject, right? Something that we don't even know is 100% possible or not possible, to 100% pull away your emotions from something, because you are a human being, you're not a computer. And let's say I try to present it as an objective argument, you know, listen, this is just me thinking about the way that things are, you know, you can come at whatever angle you want, but this is me pulling away all bias and just thinking about it from the pure factual standpoint. Then I'd be presenting something that it's not, right? I'd be presenting a dishonest idea. This is oftentimes how pseudoscience has just literally always worked, right? It's people going, I'm pulling away bias, when they're more just sharing their emotions. It's like the epitome of facts over feelings, where it's like, hey guys, facts don't care about your feelings, but I'm just gonna lie about all the facts to suit my feelings. Like, that's what so many people are doing with something like this. I think truth is very important. I think that thinking about things and getting to the bottom of ideas is a great thing. I love doing it. I think it's a fun pursuit. I think it's a useful pursuit. I think being able to think through an issue is one of the most important skills that's like completely underrated, but I will never say that truth will ever be absolute, because it doesn't seem like it can be, right? My other idea here is almost going against, though, all those things I just said, and thinking about this from the angle of somebody in the past, right? These same ideas that I'm talking about here could very easily be used to stagnate any sort of progress we've made. Let's say I'm in the year like 1800 talking about, like, you know, as much as philosophy might be great and Plato has a great point about all these things, you know, I'm not going to outthink my own humanity. This is how I feel, and I think it's okay to admit that that's how I feel, whether or not it might 100% be the truth. That would lead to a lot of bad stuff still being around today if everybody thought about it like that. So as much as, you know, maybe I'm coming at this from the angle of like, this is what's useful for my life and maybe some of yours too, I think it's an imperfect angle, because the idea of rationalism does have just like a very good historical argument for it, of like, if like this is how things have progressed, is by being rational rather than tapping into any sort of emotions, right? Which is why I think, one, there's two ideas that I could go with here. One, does that stop at a point, right? Did it come to a point where you can almost be too rational to the point where you're adverse, right? I don't think that's true. I just don't see how that would work, right? It's almost the conversation we're having last week where it was like progress will get to a point where we hit the perfect progress and we should just stop going. Like, I don't think that's how things are going to work. However, I do think maybe there's a caveat that whenever you are having an emotion that infringes upon another person, that's where rationalism needs to 100% be applied, right? Because you should only be infringing upon somebody if it's the absolute truth, like if it's 100% a rational thing to do. I would like to say you should never be infringing upon somebody, but that would be speaking in absolutes, which this whole video is about why that's not a good idea. So I'm not going to do that because that'd be a huge glaring hole in this whole thing. Largely you shouldn't, of course. We all know that, right? But I think maybe it's almost like a selective thing that should be applied when it needs to be applied. This is a big thing that I alluded to earlier that I was coming to with philosophy, where it's like emotions versus ideas, right? And also how these things are going to interact, because philosophy is existing so we can live a better life, right? We want rationalism to be around so we can all exercise our feelings and feel better and live better lives, not so we can be more right. You know, if you were like Max Dice, you will be right about everything you say for the rest of your life, but you need to live in a cave somewhere and you will never have a hot meal again, and you are going to be a dirty, like, you're just like, you are not going to be you're not going to be good. Like, you're going to be completely in the worst circumstance ever. I wouldn't care. Like, I would never go in that cave. I would not take being right about everything over my own health and well-being, right? And that's where I feel that, like, philosophy has served us to this point where it's like we're so focused on being right that we're losing track of the fact that these things do exist for a functional purpose. These things exist so we can live a better life. And being like, I have rationalism in my back pocket to put out there whenever I need to learn to help this thing, I think is a much better thing than having a guiding philosophy. I think that's why I hate labels, right? If I were to label myself as a rationalist at this moment, then for the rest of, my thought, I would have to apply that lens to it, where I think that's not how these things are meant to work. I think that philosophy is meant to be functional, it's meant to serve our lives, and being like, I'm educated on these other subjects that I can pull out when I need to help elevate my life, is the way it's meant to be, rather than being like, I'm 100% right about everything all the time because I pulled away my biases. I don't think that's as useful. I think that's almost, I think you've out-rationalized the fact that we made this so we could be happy, right? The other thing, the big hole in this, though, is like, what system do you use then to pull out what when? Like, do we have rules of when to pull out rationalism versus, like some other philosophy? And then if we come up with a set of rules of what to pull out when, we have a new philosophy and a new umbrella we're living under, which is antithetical to this whole idea of pulling out the right thing at right times. And that's almost like, I'm obliged to say the answer here is to read philosophy on a functional basis, but that in itself would be a large, broad statement that is overarching over everything and then would influence everything. And that's the idea that I'm getting at as being problematic here. I don't know. I'm stumped, guys. There's probably a philosopher that's already thought of this. I just gotta keep reading, I guess. But this is the painting. So yesterday, I don't know if you guys remember, long time ago by now, I tried putting the colors in different spots and not connecting them, and I thought it was cool, and then I went way overboard here, guys. I really just, wow. This is just a mess. Completely wrong idea here. I apologize, honestly, for making you look at this. This is just a mess. So there's a balance in how to use these colors. I might have one more with these to do, I don't know. Either way, what do you think about today's discussion? I feel like this is almost in line with yesterday's, where it's a little bit too just out there. Like, I don't even know what I'm gonna name this again. I gotta stop talking about what I'm gonna name these, because you've already seen the name by the time you're here. Like, you can easily comment below, like, Dice, it's so easy, you just gotta name it, because you can see the name. Like, this is a problem that's already solved by the time this is out. Until next time, guys, gals, and pals, my name, Max Dice, just touched the mic, and until next time, I'm here. No, I gotta say, this has been Paint and Talk episode 197. You know that's also in the title, as we've been discussing. I'm here every morning, painting and talking. Why am I forgetting? How have I done 197 episodes and I still cannot get this right? What is wrong with...